Hello, strangers. But it's funny, because you look kind of familiar. And this is story 34.
Oh, I have stories. I'm a cop. Every one of us has a story or two. Running headlong into sketchy situations comes with the territory. But I'll start you off easy with a nice urban legend. Or maybe not so nice. Because there's not a statey, sheriff, or humble beat cop who hasn't heard about the drug-running Diablo. It may surprise some people that drug running would be a problem in the Midwest, so far from the border narco-dramatized and publicized on TV. Let me assure you, it's a problem that doesn't respect borders, nor always require importing. There are plenty of homegrown drugs around throughout the continental United States, but for stuff that can't be as easily concocted in modern-day moonshine stills, aka trailers out in the sticks, airports with private Cessnas can provide a quick leap anyway. But planes are too big, their movements too tracked to stay under the radar as such an illicit enterprise would require. So, enter the Diablo. With a name like Diablo, you know we're not talking about a minivan. In 1992, the first commercially available car able to top speeds of 200 miles per hour, or 320 kilometers per hour, hit the market. It was the Lamborghini Diablo. There were limited runs as early as 1990, but a 30-car run is hardly available to the common folk. A mean, slick, 3,500 some odd pounds of power with a mid-mount engine, the only concession of maintaining its balance, as it debuted with no anti-lock brakes or power steering. As America does not have an Autobahn, you may wonder where this could even be driven to its full potential legally. Aside from a few sanctioned racetracks, you'd be right to wonder. But if you're wondering how to enjoy such a car legally, you've already excluded yourself from a subset of society to whom the question of legal simply would not occur. No, what they'd get to worrying about is how you could handle a car going that fast. Hitting a corner at those speeds would cost you both the car and likely your life, as well as whatever cargo you were attempting to transport at such high speed. What do? Well, for one, you find you a road that has minimal turns. Ideally, such a road should include a major airport for that cargo. Well, say hello to I-70. It's a near straightaway route from Kansas City, Missouri to Denver, Colorado. And Denver, Colorado is home of one of the largest international airports in the United States. Everyone says they know the guy, or a friend of the guy, who first reported seeing something amiss on a speed trap late one night in the early 90s. He was stationed on an empty stretch of I-70. As the story goes, he was fiddling with his coffee thermos when he heard what sounded like a jet engine off in the distance. But then, his radar gun blipped, and it read out a speed of 204 miles per hour. He hit the cherries and berries, but those blue and red lights reflected on nothing. No answering red taillights in either direction. There was simply nothing there. No one bought the young rook's story the next day, nor when he reported the same occurrence 3 days later. But when a more senior cop got the same spot a week later and confirmed the rookie's story, well, people started to talk. Kansas City started getting an influx of drugs in numbers and types that hadn't been as large a problem in the area before. Vice cops twisted arms on their CIs, confidential informants, but they got nowhere. There were no locally run operations producing that sort of product in that amount in any of their vast networks of crime. The pieces simply weren't coming together. And they wouldn't. Not until the cops changed focus to the drugs being imported to the area and not manufactured therein. The police started putting more people along the route of the spot where the readings had emanated. At this point, they figured it was a privately owned plane. Attempts to catch it by watching the routes from Ojinaga to Kansas City via I-35 and 44, however, proved that theory incorrect. Those odd radar blips puzzled the team, but finally, a clue. A thrown soda can discovered right after a late-night reading, 203 miles per hour, and crammed into that soda can the way a kid will tuck their lunch trash. Bits of a sticker. The sticker was too wet to read beyond a partial of black bars. A barcode, half of one anyway, from a checked luggage tag. And when they put those pieces together and took them to the nearest airport, they found that that tag resolved at Denver International. But that was a clue that took them backwards in the investigation, not forwards. For private planes don't issue checked bag tags. Even in the 1990s, luggage was getting checked through security, especially when coming from our southern neighbors. The amounts coming in precluded smuggling via tourist suitcases or subtle tchotchkes. They took a step back and looked at the evidence they had. Someone had flown to Denver. That someone had blasted down I-70 after the flight. So what on earth could be causing a radar reading above 200 miles per hour on this dusty, lonesome straightaway if it wasn't a plane? I may not know the people who were involved. They were far before my time. But to this day at the station house, remnants remain. One of these remnants is a magazine advertisement. It's pegged to one of the corkboards down the hallway. And that advertisement is for the newest Lamborghini to hit the market, with the top speed circled in smeary, thick black marker. So now they had a means. They had something that could approach those speeds. But now what? Back to the airport. Someone got the bright idea to sit on their footage, looking through all the parking lots. And finally, they were able to spot something that looked an awful lot like that advertisement. At least, it had the right rake. Instead of its well-known colors, though, this one was painted a matte charcoal, and that plus the graininess of closed-circuit television footage. Well, you take a look sometime. It hurts your eyes to try and tease out the details, the lines of something for too long. That could explain why the car appeared to vanish. Well, not even vanish. Why the car never appeared to appear at all. Once you take out the lights, of course. For when the bleary-eyed cops finally saw a man in a coat and dark hat approach the smudgy object on screen, they also saw the man disappear into its void. No running lights, no interior lights, and no headlights. There was a sense of movement, of wet puddles on the concrete being eclipsed, then returning to view, and the parking spot was left truly empty. We weren't necessarily doing profiles of criminals back then, but this made the Diablo seem even more unworldly than human. As I mentioned, the car was notoriously hard to handle. No ABS, no power steering, a wide body meant to grip the road, making cornering difficult at regular speeds. This all meant that the upper arm strength and steadiness needed to pilot it at the speeds registered on the radar guns already ruled out any casual drivers. Add in driving at those speeds in the pitch black night with no lights. A ghost was more likely, even if we had the car on film. Once. We had that car on film precisely once. I've always believed there had to be a mole, a CI of their own on the inside of the station, because after that one instance of the Diablo caught on film, no amount of patrols through the airport parking lot could turn up another. But the drugs kept arriving, in larger quantities that threatened to turn the area into a drug den if something wasn't done. That brings me to the piece of the story that hasn't made it out into the general population. For my station, the first and only I've ever worked at, actually has a larger piece of the story in our impound lot, covered with a sun-bleached tarp. For one night, one of the cops staking out I-70 picked up more than a blip on the radar gun. Oh, it blipped all right. A solid 209, the highest in record. But a second later, the cops' human ears picked up their own signal. Screeching brakes, and the unmistakable sound of 3,500 pounds of Italian engineering crunching, rolling, landing on the pavement. In the end, it had been something low-flying, at least temporarily. The cop slammed out of his squad car and ran towards the sound, even as it was joined by a sudden spray of orange and yellow light. Down the road, following skid marks stinking of fresh rubber, and down the gully next to the highway, he found the Diablo, and like its namesake, it was ablaze. He radioed in, but stopped short as he registered a high-pitched, almost whistling sound. He took some steps backwards in alarm, when the dispatcher prompted him, asking him what was going on. The response he gave was quoted to this day in every retelling. "My God, he's alive, and he's screaming." Cop ran to the car, panic making him forget the rule we learn as children. Careful, don't touch, it's hot. He didn't get a chance to relearn it. As he neared, the windows exploded out and sent him ass over tea kettle. He knocked himself dazed on a rock. He was still staring up at the sky when backup arrived. As the other cops circled, they pulled their friend from the blast scene and began speculating. Some posited the driver had lost control. A car like that was basically a jet engine with a saddle on top, for all it could be controlled at top speed. Some joked that a rogue cop may have dropped a speed strip, which, while they all laughed and pretended to approve, they all knew well that such an attempt could have caused an accident. When the crime scene guys descended in their little white plastic suits, crawling over the remains like ants on a sugar cube, the grim findings they carried out made the laughter peter down. A charred body, smelling hot and evil and vaguely sweet, hands clawed up as though the driver still clutched the steering wheel, trying to control it, even in death. Melted plastic, blackened powder, likely the latest illicit exports meant to hit our city, and a pair of what looked like high-tech swimmer goggles, only black. You've guessed, I'm sure, but you can forgive a bunch of cops from BFE in the 90s for not immediately identifying night vision goggles. At least that explained away one piece of how the driver had managed to keep a hand on the Diablo. He hadn't been completely in the dark. But as for how he'd finally lost control, like a teen stepping out of a circle of salt and the demon they've summoned finally getting a chance to strike. Again, those crime scene bubbas were the ones to crack the case. For unlike the first cop, who'd run straight away to the crash, They backtracked those long, screeched treads down the road, and they found something much worse as the cause of the crash. In the opposite gulch next to the freeway, the tatters of a brightly colored puffer jacket flagged them down weakly. The jacket covered what was left of a young girl, carrying a pack with a few smashed cans of food and pages of a notebook covered in ballpoint pen drawings. There was no ID, and the remains so brutalized by the impact that the autopsy report referenced jelly-like in its otherwise dry play-by-play. She was chalked up as a runaway hitchhiker. A Jane Doe entered into the system. Science and technology advance all the time, and we nod to her, assured that someday some far-flung relative will take the 23andMe plunge, and on that day, we'll finally be able to return her to her people. But for now, she has people. Adopted people, but people nonetheless. She has us. She was just a kid on an adventure. Where were her parents? Why wasn't somebody looking out for her? And the who in that sentence might as well be directed at us. If we'd caught on faster, spent less time ribbing the rook and more time thinking, could we have figured it out? We can't know, because we didn't. And Jane Doe paid the price and stopped the Diablo when the rest of us couldn't. So, yeah, the artist's recreation of what her mangled face bones suggest was her face look over us, solemn as a child at their first communion, which is fitting because her big brown eyes oversee the solemn, secret vow we have at our station house: to think faster, to act quicker, and to never stop looking for her. The Diablo, the devil, may have tried to take her, but in our own way, we keep her safely away until she can finally go home.
And that was story number 34. If you'd like to reach out, email and socials are in the description. Interacting with the like, comment, and subscribe features does something, allegedly. And otherwise, we'll meet again next Tuesday. Stay strange, stay safe, and take care, strangers.